Just briefly, I don't want to spend a lot of time with this. I'm trying to be short. Look in Ephesians chapter 5 just for a second. And I hope I'm not wearing you out with the Message translation, but I just like the way it says it. Look at what the Message says in verse 1. Watch what God does, and then you do it. Just like children who learn proper behavior from their parents. How about that? Look at what God does. Well, how are you going to watch what God does? How are you going to see what God does? Well, you look here. This is how we see what God does. This is how we know how God's attitude is about things. Right? We've kind of been looking at that. In fact, that's the thing that we should emphasize mostly is His love towards, and we've been looking at all the details. Believe me, we're just scratching the surface. There's a lot more I could read to you about that. But He says, watch what God does and then you do it, like children who learn proper behavior. And by the way, that's good advice too. Good place for children to learn proper behavior from their parents. Now that's presuming that the parents are, acting like parents. But anyway, watch what God does, then you do it. Like children who learn proper behavior from their parents. All right, next verse. Mostly what God does is love you. And he says, watch what God does. And here's what mostly God's concerned about. Here's mostly what God does. He is love you. Keep company with Him and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. This is worth observing. It's worth thinking about this. How did He love us? His love was not cautious but extravagant. He didn't love in order to get something from us. Did you know that's how human love is? Human love loves in order to get something. It's reciprocal. I'll love you as long as you love me. Right? Human love turns to something very nasty very easily, But God's love is on a higher plane than that. It's not based on the performance of the other person. Observe how Christ loved us. His love was not cautious but extravagant. He didn't love in order to get something from us, but in order to give everything of Himself to us. Love like that. How about that? Not in order to get something from us, but in order to give something to us. That's how God's love is towards us. If we're here in chapter 5, turn over just a page to a little bit later. To verse 25. When Paul writes to the Christians at different places, he has a little format that he follows. In the first part of his epistles, he's usually pretty strict about this. He presents the gospel in various ways. And it's good to study his epistles because he says it a little different every time. And I think as Paul lived his life, he found better ways to say it. And it's worth reading. The first part of Paul's epistles, he presents the gospel. If you'll notice, if you read the first part of all Paul's epistles, he never talks about you and what you should do. He always talks about God and what He has done. That's what the gospel is. Gospel's not about you and what you do. It's all about Jesus and what He's done for you. So Paul presents in the first part of his letters, like in this book of Ephesians. If we had time, we could go back and read that. It's beautiful what he has to say. It's all about what God has done through Jesus for us. And then at the end, he comes to you, the reader, the recipient. And then what he says is, here's how you should live in the light of what He's done for you. Here's how we respond. If you're a Christian and you're a recipient of His love for you, here's how to live a Christian life in the light of what He's done for you. And it's always in terms of walking in love. Paul emphasizes this idea of love as the fundamental and the foremost thing. Now notice here, he's talking about different relationships in life, parents and children, husbands and wives. And I want to start here where he's talking to the husbands, verse 25. Just to observe how he links this to what Jesus has done. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself. Notice he compares it to the love of Christ. That He might sanctify and cleanse it by the washing of water by the word. Again, talking about Jesus. That He might present it to Himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing. That it should be holy and without blemish. Notice, by the way, this is all talking about Jesus and what He's done for us. Anton, go back to verse 25 just for a second. Give me the Message translation. Let's read this. I like what it says. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives exactly as Christ did for the church. Now, notice in this relationship, he defines in this very specific relationship of husbands and wives, he says, the way to know how to act, look at Jesus and imitate Him. Exactly as Christ did for the church. A love marked by giving, not getting. Boy, there's a shocking thought. That'd be a good marriage seminar right there. And everybody'd get mad and they'd get them leaving. That'd be the end of it. That'd be the shortest marriage seminar. Read this verse and everybody'd get mad and leave. And I need to be sure and get my money up front. Husbands, go all out. See, nobody really wants to hear this. What people mostly want to hear in a marriage seminar is, how can I make my mate change? What's the magic formula to make them change? Husbands, go all out in love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church. A love marked by giving, not getting. Okay, next verse. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring out the best in her. That's nice. Next verse. Dressing her in dazzling white silk, radiant with holiness. Notice Jesus did all this. Next verse. And that is how husbands ought to love their wives. They're really doing themselves a favor since they're already one in marriage. Might as well finish this. Go on and get the next one. No one abuses his own body, does he? No, he feeds and pampers it. That's how Christ treated us, the church. Notice how he keeps linking it back to Jesus and what Jesus has done for us, since we're part of his body. Okay, that's good. Let's see, one more. And I would be remiss in not reading this to you. The best passage about love, of course, is 1 Corinthians chapter 13, beginning with verse 4. And today, just in conclusion, let me read it to you from the Amplified Translation. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4. I know you've heard this before. It's very familiar. But just because it's familiar, it doesn't mean we can't read it again. Now remember, when he's talking about love, he's talking about God's love, and our response is acting like and reflecting the way God loves us in the way we treat others. And so Paul here defines what love is like, the kind of love that God shows toward us. Love endures long and is patient and kind. Why is he telling us that? Because he's endeavoring to get across to us that we should be, as we walk in love, patient and kind and endure long. Love is never envious or boils over with jealousy. It's not boastful or vainglorious. Does not display itself haughtily. Okay? Love is not conceited or arrogant or inflated with pride. It's not rude or unmannerly. It does not act unbecomingly. Love, God's love in us. Now here's where we get to the good part. Does not insist on its own rights or its own way. This would be another one for my marriage seminar if I'm going to make everybody mad. Love does not insist on its own rights or its own way. Boy, that's interesting, isn't it? For it's not self-seeking, it's not touchy or fretful or resentful. It takes no account of the evil done to it. Pays no attention to a suffered wrong. Now listen, believe me, I've talked to people and got this response. I can't do that. Well, did you ever consider that that's how God acts toward you? Did you consider this is God's attitude toward you? Listen to what it says here. Takes no account of the evil done to it. Pays no attention to a suffered wrong. You know, that is so contrary to how we think about God. You know, here's what we think. Here's what most people think God is doing. They think God's up in heaven, and he's got a big feather pen, a big quill pen, and he's dipping it in the ink, and he's watching, kind of like Santa Claus. He knows who's naughty. He's making a list and checking it twice. He knows who's been naughty and not. And everything wrong you do, aha, he says. He dips his pen in the ink, and he writes that down. This says that love, did we just read in John's epistle that God is love? Did we just read that earlier? God is love. And this is defining the love of God and how and really he's talking about how we should live as a reflection of God's love for us. And when he says, takes no account of the evil done to it, pays no attention to a suffered wrong, you think he would ask you to do more than he can do? You think he is asking more out of you than he's willing to do? No, I don't think so. It says, he takes no account of well, how can that be that God takes no account of evil and pays no attention to a suffered wrong? It's because he considers he's already done something about it in his relationship with you. The reason he doesn't keep score and the reason he's not making a list and checking it twice, because he considers he's already taken all those things that were missteps and mistakes and wrongs in your life. He's already put them on Jesus. Why did he do that? Because of his love for you. Because of his love for you, he's already taken all those things and Jesus has paid for them. He's absorbed them into himself and taken them away so that you can have a clear, clean relationship with him. Now the antidote or the answer to it, if you have a hard time conceiving of how you can live in this kind of an attitude, spend more time thinking about how God has this kind of attitude towards you. The way God loves you. Think about his unconditional love for you. And after a while, it might take a while, after a while it'll sink in on you and it'll begin to fill you up. And once it fills you up, it's easy for the overflow to splash over on others. Okay, let's all stand up. You're all good, patient listeners today. Jesus!